Hey guys, so you guys seem to really enjoy that cost breakdown of the top 5 meta decks, so I decided to do it again, but for more so decks that are between tier 2 and rogue. And so basically, as a recap, what I did was essentially just literally look up every single card on TCG Player and use the lowest market price. I know there's websites out there where you can put your deck list in, it gives you the total price of whatever deck on TCG Player, but I was finding it wasn't very accurate, so I decided to just do it all by myself. And before we continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as usual, links and discount codes below for Yu-Gi-Oh! Supplies, so definitely go make sure to check those out. So we're going to start off with Dark World, and I'm only covering 5 decks in this video, and there's obviously a lot of other decks that could have very well made it, so hopefully you're not too offended if they're not on it, just based on some of the regional top data that's available, which is also thanks to my friend Teamset Pass on YouTube. Make sure to check him out, he does regional top data. So, I have my list of 5 decks here, but definitely there's other decks that could have been included. So Dark World though, a very, very popular deck online, even after that initial hype of when that Dark World structure deck came out, which really wasn't that long ago, and we've already had a new structure deck in Traptrix, which we'll get to later, but all in all, decent 49% win percentage. Not amazing. It's not a playstyle that every player would likely enjoy though, because it's a very solitaire heavy kind of deck where you're just comboing off for 15 minutes straight, kind of like an FTK style deck. And so, but all in all, it's definitely had some regional tops. So for example, this is the list, the top 8 Bogota regional not that long ago. And so for the most part, you see right from the breakdown in terms of cost as well, all of it included, this entire exact list was about $150 USD, which is very affordable from the context of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And so for the most part, yes, against Kashira, it's probably not the best when everything has to get banished instead of all of these cards that need to go to the grave to trigger. But other than that, it's a pretty fun deck. It's a kind of a unique deck, and again, just an affordable strategy and something that you could test out the waters. And it's kind of in a way, a bit of a legacy deck. It did have a lot of success and popularity 10 years ago, and now it's back again. So that part's kind of cool as well. And now a lot of you wanted to sort of focus on the deck core in terms of cost, because a lot of you might already have the staples, right? And of course, what considers as deck core is kind of subjective as well. But for this one, it's a little bit more straightforward. Just all the Dark World cards and the danger cards that this top 8 list played, in which case it's just $30. Honestly, for decks like these where it's based on structure decks, just get the 3 structure decks, and that'll just get you majority of the ground, and you'll also get a lot of good staples with it, whether you play it in that particular deck or in future decks. So definitely get those Dark World structure decks if you're interested in playing this one. Next, we do have Dragon Link. Kind of weird to put this in Rogue now. I guess it's somewhere between Rogue and Tier 2. In terms of regional tops, it's been okay. Hasn't had a lot more tops than any of the decks listed here, though. So I think it's kind of fair to put it in this spot. Online, it's definitely dipped a lot in play as well, 14th. But win percentage-wise, it's pretty solid. Obviously, a smaller sample size than some of the other decks that I'm going to list, as well as especially the meta decks. But you know what? I think you can always be confident in Dragons. They're just always going to get support over time. Konami loves them. There's just so much generic dragon support, and for the most part, it is a bit of a big brain combo deck. But you know what? If you're really interested in taking this on, I think go for it. The problem though is it is not a cheap deck anymore, because nowadays, the Bystials play a big part of Dragon Link, particularly after the Chaos Ruler ban as well as the Halki Fibrax ban. This is kind of like the way you play now, and because Rebellion is so expensive, you look here, total for this exact deck list was $435, which is very, very expensive. And you have other than the Bystial Magma Jerusalem that did kind of lower in cost. Extra deck though, $58. You know what? That's actually pretty solid. And the side deck, of course, that could be different for any the way you want to play it. But overall, if you also look at the deck core though, it's still pretty expensive. Bulk of that was actually the deck core and not really staples, because again, the Rebellions just carry the cost already on its own. So if you don't already have the core, maybe it's a bit harder to recommend to take on this deck, particularly because it's so expensive and it's not a tier 1 deck. At this cost, realistically, you might as well just go for more of a meta strategy that you can check out in my previous video for some of the tier 1 choices. And then we have Punk. So this is kind of interesting now, especially with Theory and stuff coming out. They go pretty well with this deck. I think the one that's topped actually did not even play the Theory and stuff, but you can. And it's been gaining a lot of popularity the last few months, even after sort of the, Chaos Ruler ban, for example, when this was originally used just as a package and a lot of variety of different decks. Even after those bans, Punk still had a lot of solid play online on Dueling Book, as you would see in my tier list videos. Win percentage wise, 49%. Again, you know what? if you're like a rogue deck, if you can hover around 50%, that's actually quite solid. There's definitely a lot of really bad decks that will be like way in like the 30s, so this is actually pretty decent. So in terms of that deck list that topped, and this is also on Team Bordeaux channel, you can check them out on YouTube. So Punk, unfortunately, the package itself is actually kind of pricey as well. This deck in particular was also really expensive because he was playing, for example, the double thrust. That on its own is probably close to $150, as well as, you know, the taunts, I mean like 15, 16 each. So, you know, it's definitely not a cheap deck to play. It's a pretty fun combo deck. Definitely, you do lose a lot of life points as you activate these effects. So in time, it's definitely not the greatest option. But it's very synchro heavy. So I know a lot of you probably enjoy that, especially from the 5Ds days. And, you know, Psychic and Punisher is kind of hard to out for a lot of decks. And so overall, especially in the side too, you can kind of almost ignore that because the Fenrir's, that's what's kind of ballooning up that side deck cost. And again, side deck, you can just make it yourself with completely really budget cards, and it would still be a really great side deck. So in terms of the deck core, as I mentioned, the Punk cards are still expensive, and so, you know, $185 for this set of 20 cards plus another few from the extra deck on top of whatever else staples that you need to fill this deck out. It's a bit of a hefty price tag, right, for a rogue deck. And not to mention, this list in particular was not including the Therian stuff and the regulars on the I think they're like at least 40 each, and you usually play, maybe you can get away with one, and maybe that's kind of the standard for Punk. I'm not too sure. I know you usually see 1 to 2. So it's just some things to consider. I will actually have a Punk Therian deck list coming up the next day when you're watching this video, and so definitely stay tuned for that one. And then we have Mathmech, and this is probably more of a tier 2 deck potentially, at least based on what I'm seeing in the dueling book data. It's getting a lot of play online, and it's doing really well, 63%, pretty insane. Usually have those few players on dueling book who are really good with this deck, and they probably can carry those win percentages by themselves. And it's actually gotten a couple regional tops in this new format as well, so it's back to meta relevancy. It seems it was almost essentially in tier 1 status at the Power of the Elements format, like at worst case the best of tier 2 deck. It was really solid. The Bystials and the Grave Shufflers really ruined this strategy, but now they're kind of out of the mix, and you just have to worry about Keshtir's Macrocosmos kind of effect. And so in terms of the deck core, it actually won first place at a regional, and so this list in particular, you know, the total deck cost, I would say maybe kind of overlooked that, because if you look closely in the side deck, $250, that's purely because of the 3 thrusts, which by themselves is probably like over $200, which makes up pretty much the entire side deck. So if you look just the main and extra, that's like $200. Again, for a competitive deck, that's actually really solid, and a lot of the staples you probably have anyways, because these are hand traps. It's a deck that's very flexible and can play a lot of hand traps or board breakers, for example, and the deck is very consistent in getting to that you know, typical Mathmech combo. And the trap is what is really strong. Just can set up kind of in a way essentially a negate, like a hand rip, and another, you know, send a card on the field and things like that. So it's a really strong deck, and I think it's pretty popular as well. In terms of the deck core, again, kind of subjective in what you consider as a deck core, but even with including Signet Mining and Parallel Exceed and the small worlds, it's still like $65. So this is definitely a solid option as well to choose as your rogue option or tier 2 option, however you want to call it. It's very consistent deck. It's flexible. You can technically probably have a decent chance going second as well because of all the hand traps you can play. I'm not entirely sure how this deck does in terms of like the Labyrinth matchup, but you know, someone tell me in the comments how you feel if you play this deck. But all in all, I think this is certainly a rogue deck that I would recommend. And then we have Traptrix finally, which of course is more of probably a tier 2 deck. Of course, I know I'm including anything that's just not tier 1 for this video, basically. It's a really good deck. It's played second most online in the last 7 days on Dueling Book, which is insane. Now, obviously, there's some part related to that would be the hype, because the structure decks just became legal, you know, a week ago, for example. But even beyond the hype, I think it will see a lot of play because it's actually a really good deck. And 50% win percentage, you know what? It's solid. You probably have a lot of new players trying this deck out as well. It's probably bringing that win percentage down, but overall, really great deck. And so now this is a list that did well at a regional by Bordeaux. He's you know, has always been known as the Traptrix guy, so I'm sure he's really appreciated the new support that they've recently gotten. And so if you can see right away, the deck cost $275, pretty solid from a Yu-Gi-Oh competitive standpoint, and 150 of that is Pot of Prosperity, right? So a bulk of that you can just shed by just playing budget alternatives. And if you're new and or returning to this game and you want some kind of a budget option to start because you don't want to commit too much at the beginning, but you also want a solid deck, this is definitely the best one I would recommend. So you know, just buy the 3 structure decks. That will just get you started, and you'll have all the staple traps and just a great product in general. And so overall, it's a very solid deck. It's not a very overly complicated deck to play either, and you know, trap hole kind of things, I mean, that's pretty nostalgic. I mean, for example, this list does not play bottomless trap hole, but some do, I know, and that's such a classic card that I personally love from back when I originally played in like 2010s. If you look at the deck core, or what you consider as a core, I actually kind of laughed that it ended up being only $12. I also threw in the field spell in there because I don't think Bortle was playing it. But again, I would recommend, you know, just pay that $30 and get those 3 structure decks. That's a much better way than just buying these cards individually. I mean, you do need the Parallax Seed separately, though. I don't think that comes in the structure deck. And, you know, some of the staples, like you do need a lot of trap staples, but they're really not that expensive, and you can just, you know, you'll get a lot of those in the structure deck as well. And also the extra deck, you know, the Zeus is where it gets kind of pricey. But you know what? Maybe just go with like the 1 Zeus if you're not really fully invested in playing competitive, because the only reason they're playing 2 Zeus is because of the Kashira matchup, because they're going to rip a card out of the extra deck. But other than that, you know, like I said, this is definitely the best deck that I would recommend in terms of value for money. I think it is just so incredibly amazing that we have this kind of deck readily available now thanks to those structure decks. So yeah, anyways, hopefully this video was helpful in helping you decide that next rogue deck or whatever deck that you want to invest into this format, because not everyone wants to pay for Kashira, which is a very expensive deck that you would see in my other video. And so yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Thanks again for watching, and of course a big thanks to my Patreons as always: Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Barrel Lord, Spooky Boogie, Steven Phillips, Chaz Blanks, and my newest Patreon, Barbados. I do have these spreadsheets available for any of my data videos for my Patreon, so including this video, you would have just a list of all the card prices and everything, things like that. So anyways, thanks for watching. Take care, guys.